Hello, lovely sewing friends. How are you? I wanted to talk to you guys. Okay, first of all, two things we'll quickly touch on. First of all, we have a finished whale here. Look at this little one. Look, he's got a little tail. Oh, isn't he gorgeous? I finished this one last night. So this one is for my old manager at one of the ice cream places that I used to work at. She's just had a baby, her first baby, so this is for her. And also, do you guys remember that dress I was wearing last week, right? And I said I was going to make it into a top. Well, here it is. Look. So it's a nice boxy top. It's one that I've worn. It's one that I've sewn up before, the pattern, but I lost the pattern, annoyingly. So what I did is I got the old top and I traced around it and I just made up my new top here. So this was originally that dress. So on Saturday I was going to my sister's housewarming and I was unpicking the whole thing, the whole dress as I was going there. But the one little touch I did keep from the original dress is I kept the original label, because this was a Koto dress. And I also have the Koto pants as well. I had hoped that I would have enough fabric of this left over to widen the pants on this, because I have quite big legs, thighs, if you know, you know. So I didn't. However, I'll show you the scraps. This is all that's left of the scraps, right? And of course this will make another whale. Don't you worry, I'm already on it. But like, you know, I've got a little bit there. I'm sure I could, see, I could either cut this up and, you know, widen these pants or make it into a whale. I'm sure you'll find out next week what I do. But in the meantime, I'll show you my top. So this is the top. I'm really, really happy with it because I've actually not tried it on, but like it's a boxy top. And then in the back, it's a little pleat here. The one thing that annoys me about this is that pleat is not dead center. It needs to go, you know, like, that annoys me. However, there's a story behind it, because obviously if you cut your fabric for a garment out of the disassembled pieces of another garment, you're not going to have perfect, you know, proportions and placement. Saying that, this hem, the hem of this, it obviously needs to be hemmed, but I originally had a 4 centimeter hem on it that you then fold 2 and then 2 and then top stitch around, but I didn't have enough fabric, so we're just gonna have to, what I was thinking of doing was making some bias binding and then doing it as a facing on the inside. So I could use up that extra fabric there to do it. However, I'm a little bit skeptical because I don't want to, I can easily get some other bias binding because you're not going to see it on the inside. So why should I use that fabric, because it's in such limited supply, for this when I could easily use it for this and actually wear these pants. So, or make a whale from it. I do have enough whales for now, but I could always do with some more. So that's where we're up to in here. And speaking of, I'm just going to quickly mention this. I actually hand stitched this facing down, because otherwise I would have to have like a line of top stitching around here. And I've done that on the previous one I've made. And I just noticed that like, it took me about 15 minutes to hand stitch it. And I much prefer it without that line of top stitching around there for the facing. Ow, just got it caught on my earring, the thing. But yeah, I'm really happy with that, considering like that dress has been in my wardrobe for 5 years now, and I've like hardly worn it. The first time I wore it in 5 years was last week when I was filming. So it's now a top that I'll wear all the time. So I'm really, really happy with that. And speaking of that, I'm just gonna pop that back up there. I'm gonna have a sip of water and then we can talk, okay? So, how are you? Good. I'm so glad. I wanted to talk to you guys today about setting up your sewing project for success, because I live in chaos most of the time. I do not set aside time for me to sew. So what I like to do is break it down into little steps. So I'm going to tell you guys what I do. Okay, so imagine you're like, I really want to do some sewing this weekend, whatnot. What should I make? First things first, I tend to find a sewing pattern. And I have quite a few sewing patterns that I can choose from, because as soon as I've seen a sewing pattern that I like, I'll tend to get it and then kind of print it out and then put it to one side, so that I know when I find the perfect fabric or the perfect motivation to start sewing, I can go straight into it and I don't have to be like, oh, my printer's out of ink or something. I just get the pattern and I go. And then with that comes picking fabric. So multiple different ways you can choose your fabric, and choosing the right fabric for the right sewing project is really important. So what I tend to do when I'm sewing for myself is I shop my stash. And what that means is, I've been sewing for 20 years. I have a lot of fabric. For example, like I have fabric I haven't even cut into. Like I've got this lovely merino here. I saw about 5 years ago and I bought it because it's beautiful. And I'll make something with it one day. I have a lot of turtlenecks at the moment. I don't need more turtlenecks. Could be really cool for like little leggings for myself for winter. But I know I love this fabric, so I bought it. So it's already in my stash. So I know what's in my stash and what I've already got. But if I'm like, no, I don't really have something for this pattern, this sewing pattern, I need to go get something, I'll head to the fabric shop. I like to shop for my fabric in person. However, there are a few different fabric stores that I feel comfortable shopping online. One of them is Hand-sewn, which is where I got quite a few of my most beautiful fabrics. And also another one is Liberty of London Fabrics, beautiful. So I tend to either shop my stash, go in person, or shop online. Those are my three main ones. But if I'm going in store, the way that I pick fabric is, first of all, I look at the sewing pattern recommendation types of fabrics, because let's say, for example, you're making a coat, you're not exactly going to go to the silk section and get a silk chiffon. You're going to go to the wools and the more heavier coat fabrics. So seeing what your sewing pattern recommends is a really good start, and then go from there, go into that like section or whatnot and feel the fabric. I'm a really touchy person, but if it doesn't feel nice on the roll, on the bolt of fabric, then I'm not going to wear it, you know? So making sure that you like the feel of a fabric. Also, see if it creases. For example, I am not an ironing kind of person, not at all. The only time I ever use my iron is for ironing seams and whatnot. So I do not iron my clothes. And if I choose a fabric that once it's sewn up has to then be ironed all the time, I'm not going to wear it, because I can't grab and go with it. I have to iron it, so I'm not going to choose that one. Another one is, because I've been sewing for 20 years, I've developed my style. I know my style. I know what I like and what I don't like. I tend to gravitate towards the same kind of fabrics. For example, I love checks. That is gorgeous. I went through a gingham phase. I also love pinks. I love pastel-esque kind of colors. I'm sure you'll notice through a bunch of my stuff and, you know, my Instagram, I tend to gravitate towards the same kind of colors. So I've developed my personal style and personal preference when it comes to colors, that I can pick out my fabrics really easily, and I know that they won't look dated on me. For example, I bought that green checked I'll go get it. Wait. You recognize this, don't we? I bought this fabric, this check fabric. You know, like, I bought this fabric when I just arrived in Melbourne, and I sewed it up about a month ago. So the fact that, like, I could hang on to this fabric for 2 years, 2.5 years nearly, and I still love it, shows that, like, you know, if I see a checked fabric that I like, I'm not going to go off it. So, yeah, liking the fabric and knowing that it is something that you will wear and also can incorporate into your wardrobe already. So I once bought a cheetah print mesh. I don't think I'm going to sew that up anytime soon because that is clearly not my style. So yeah, choose something that works with your style, your preferences of lifestyle as well, remember the ironing, and then also works with the sewing pattern itself. So if it ticks all of those boxes, you're golden. Now the next part B, is when you go to sew your sewing project or cut out. First of all, you're going to pre-wash your fabric because nobody likes shrinkage after the fact that you've sewn it up. So pre-wash your fabric as per your fabric's washing instructions. Then the second thing is when you go to cut out your fabric, take into consideration the nap of the fabric. So like a corduroy, when you brush it one way, it's going to go with the grain, and then when you do it the other way, it's going to go against the grain. So take that into consideration. Take into consideration if it's a print. So repetition, all that kind of stuff. And then when you cut everything out, one thing that I've learned, if you're cutting out your pattern pieces, try not to touch them excessively when you finish cutting them out, because as soon as you cut out your sewing pattern from your fabric, it instantly starts to shift. And so you'll notice on a lot of your sewing patterns, it will say like sew a stay stitch around the curves of the garment, so the neckline and the armholes normally, and that is because these curves have a lot less strength in the grain. The warp is up and down, and weft is left to right, left to right, and so they can warp out of shape. And so by having a stay stitch, that keeps that curve nice and curved, so that when you go to sew with it, it stays in the original shape. Then the next thing is when you actually go to sew everything. So for example, if I'm sewing up a new garment straight away, I'll do all of the straight stitches. Normally, let's say I'm making a dress, I'll do like the shoulder seams, side seams, and bust darts or waist darts first, as they're normally like the assembling kinds of sewing parts to the sewing pattern construction method. They are the kind of basic foundational seams that you're going to sew. They're also internal seams and normally straight seams, so it's nice and easy, you're going straight into it. Then when I'm sewing something, for example, if I'm sewing gathering or doing pockets or a zip, fly front, invisible zip or something like that, then I'll kind of go, okay, this is going to be something a bit more complicated. I want to make sure I'm really like ready to do that. I'm not going to be in a rush. I've set aside like 2 hours to do this, got a good movie to watch, as I do it. If you can watch a movie or a podcast, it's also good, whilst you are, doing that technique. So if you're sewing gathering, for example, you might want to change the thread color, because gathering can take a lot of excess thread, and you also have to change the stitch length. So those are two things that you need to change on your machine. So it's a lot easier to do all of your gathering all at once and not have to constantly chop and change back and forth between your regular stitch length and thread and your gathering stitch length and thread. So I tend to do all of that kind of very technical sewing in chunks, so that I'm not chopping back and forth. And also with gathering, you need to make sure that you change your stitch length back to your regular stitch length from a 5, which is a gathering basting stitch, to a 2.5 to 3, which is your regular stitch length. Because if you don't, it can have knock-on effects for your the rest of your sewing project. So make sure to change back your stitch length, because you normally don't realize until like a couple seams deep. So keep that in mind. And then when it comes to finishing touches, like, doing the hems or the facings or the buttons or a little name tag on the back, I tend to like to do these by hand, because first of all, I have the time, I can do them by hand, as I like to watch something as I do it. Also, I like to do a little bit of hand sewing on each piece that I do, because I find it like it's a personal touch that I've done. So that is quite a nice way to finish. So for example, I showed you that I did a facing on this one, I did it all by hand. And also, before we had sewing machines, we did everything by hand. So I like to have like a little bit of attention to detail in that last few steps. So there are a bunch of different ways that you can finish it by hand. So by doing the hems on your pants or the hem on a skirt. On this one, I did do it by machine, because I think there was 1.5 meters to do on here. Whereas that, is only, what is that? Probably not that much. I would say probably like 80 centimeters of hand stitching in there, and it only took me about 15 minutes because it was only like a slip stitch. Very easy hand stitching. And also, you might, because I have such good stitching skills, you can kind of see the stitches there, Whereas on here, you might be able to, you can kind of tell it there, because I haven't ironed it, but still, there's only a few little, like literally a pinprick on this that you could see. And on the inside, you can see, like, the inside doesn't have to look the best. It's a bonus if it does, but the inside doesn't have to look the best. So yeah, that is how I like to finish my garment. But I think the big takeaway from this video I want to give to you guys is that sewing has to be done step by step. You cannot rush the process of sewing something, because there's different techniques and there's different ways to do those techniques. And also, I sew as a hobby. I don't have to sew everything that I own, but also I like for sewing to be a way, as an adult, I get to learn again. Even though I've been doing this 20 years, I'm still learning. And I learn through different ways. So for example, I fixed a pair of pants. They're in the other room. That's another video. I fixed a pair of pants, and I learnt, all about reinforcing seams and everything. Like, that's cool. And, I learned different ways to do the same technique. So I saw for elastic, for example, somebody once said that instead of like dragging it through, you get a piece of bias binding or thread, or I just had bias binding, and I sewed it to the end of my elastic and then I pulled the bias binding through, and then by pulling the bias binding through, it pulled through the elastic. Instead of me like ruching along the elastic little by little, I just used the bias binding and I pulled through the bias binding, and the tail of the bias binding pulled through the elastic. Like, that is so clever. And different ways to join elastic was so good. Like sewing is something that is ever evolving, and especially with a community like the sewing community, we always love to share all of these things. So that just goes to say that even if you are no matter on your skill, if you're advanced, intermediate, or beginner, you can still only do what you're doing by doing the steps. So it's literally, you have to do it stitch by stitch. You can't do like 8 things all at once. Isn't that a metaphor for life? You can't do everything at once. So the thing that you're working on, the thing that you're doing, do it to the best of your ability and also enjoy it. The first time that the concept of enjoy the thing that you're doing occurred to me was when I did my first and only half marathon. You know, my big takeaway from that is like, I'm not setting a time, I'm not doing anything, I just want to enjoy it. And I did. And yeah, like then I was like, okay, like I enjoyed the process. And so I think like the way that we can apply that to sewing is, if you enjoy the process, no matter the result, it's a learning thing. It's starting something, to do something, to enjoy it. So I think that's my big takeaway of enjoy the process and enjoy those little steps, because you're always going to learn something from them, and it's just a bonus that you get a really cool skirt or a top at the end. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like or subscribe. Do what you got to if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, better luck next time. Bye!